What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here with a 2-hour Megamix. That is 2 hours of new true scary stories to this channel, as much as I'm able to track. If you guys enjoy this long video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Doing all of those ensures I can keep making daily videos for a long time to come, especially these longer ones. If you guys have any thoughts about the stories in this video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as one of my favorite parts about doing this is reading your guys' comments, even if I don't always get the chance to reply to them. Without further ado though, guys, I will let you enjoy the next 2 hours of true scary stories, and I will see you again at the end of the video. Thanks for watching. I used to work at a 7-Eleven here in the United States, and the scariest thing that ever happened to me there was also the single most terrifying thing that's ever happened in my entire life. It happened on a particularly quiet night. I was still kind of hungover from going out drinking the night before, and because of that, I wasn't even really paying attention when this one guy entered the store. I heard the door sliding open. I vaguely heard his footsteps as he walked up to the counter, and then, right as I was about to lift my head up and ask the man what he wanted, he slammed something down on the counter in front of me. I remember the very first thing I noticed being the sudden red splatter on my t-shirt, which was plain white. The moment his hand impacted the counter, all these little red specks appeared on my shirt. I already recoiled from the shock of having his hand slammed down in front of me, but when I saw what he just slammed down next to the register, I recoiled even further. It was a tongue, like an actual tongue. Even though it was soaked in blood, I could recognize the deep ridge running down the middle of it. It sounds like such a cliche when I think about it now, but now I understand what people mean when they say they were frozen in fear. The whole thing was an assault on my senses. I think it just short-circuited my fight-or-flight mechanism to the point where I couldn't figure out what to do. The look in the guy's eyes as he stared at me was so calm but intense. His eyes were so wide and unblinking, it was like he didn't have eyelids at all. It was only when he spoke that I actually found the will to move. All he said to me was, "Call 911. I bolted into the back office, locked the door behind me, and immediately called the cops. All the while, I watched the guy on the cameras, just standing there at the register. He didn't move at all. He seemed to be looking down, staring at the mess he'd just left on my counter. Given the gruesome nature of my emergency, there was a police patrol car and 2 cops pulling up outside in just a matter of moments. The guy didn't put up any kind of fight when they moved to arrest him. He just held his wrists and allowed them to put the handcuffs on him, then let the cops take him away. Once he was safely out of the store, I walked out of the office, trying not to look at what was still on the counter. Then I told the cops everything that happened. Obviously, it wasn't all that much, but as I was talking to them, I noticed more and more police surrounding a car in the parking lot that still had the door open. I called the store manager for the McDonald's across the street, telling them the cops had to close the store because it was an active crime scene. They rushed down to see me and find out what was going on, even though it was their day off. After telling them what happened, I went home to decompress. From what I heard after, the guy had gotten into an argument with his wife while driving somewhere. At some point, he just kinda snapped, pulled up into a parking lot, stabbed her to death, and then cut her tongue out. For some reason, he picked our 7-Eleven to walk into to slam the tongue he just cut out of her mouth down onto our countertop. As you might imagine, I was allowed to take a little bit of time off of work after that whole thing, as I just couldn't face going back there so soon. Even when I did go back, I was on edge the whole time for my first couple of shifts. I just couldn't seem to shake the image of that bloody tongue lying on the countertop in front of me. The thing I can't seem to shake either is that it wasn't enough for the guy to just stab and kill his own wife. He had to reach into her mouth afterwards and cut out her tongue. How completely insane with fury does someone have to be to do something like that? Like, what could possibly possess someone to do something so horrifying to someone they love? The guy didn't look like a monster either. He didn't look evil or deranged. All that gave away his distressed mental state was that crazy look in his eyes, the one that had frozen me in fear. It just haunts me, seeing seemingly normal people are capable of things like that. I used to work at a 7-Eleven that was right next to an art school campus. In addition to all the snacks and drinks, we had a little stationery section and kept some stuff behind the counter too. One of the things we kept behind the counter were scissors, the kind that are sealed in a plastic casing. So one day, this customer walks up to the counter with a Gatorade, and asks if he can have a pair of scissors too. Of course, I grabbed a pair for him. I scanned them and told him the price of both of his items. Instead of getting his wallet out though, he immediately started removing the plastic packaging from the scissors. I didn't think it too suspicious at first. I figured he needed them for some kind of minor emergency or something, and that he'd pay for them after cutting whatever it was that needed to be cut. Instead, once they were out of the packaging, he gripped the handle like they were a knife or something and looked me right in the eyes. "I could just kill you with these right now, you know that?" I was so stunned I didn't know what to say. I know he must have enjoyed the fearful look on my face because of the way he started smiling. All I could do was reach for my phone in my pocket and start to dial 911. I had no real way of defending myself, and I was hoping the cops would arrive before he actually killed me. Just as I tapped the numbers out, I looked up to see him walking away from the counter, laughing to himself as he walked out of the store. I stayed on the line with 911 for a while, shaking as I told them what just happened. When the cops showed up a little while later, and they took their time since it wasn't an ongoing situation, an officer reviewed the security camera footage. It turns out the guy had been doing the same thing all over town, picking out girls working retail on their own before shoplifting random items like that. He had the same MMO every single time too. He would always get away with it by telling the girl he could kill them with whatever he was stealing, be it a knife or scissors or hedge clippers. He never actually hurt someone yet, but the cops were extra focused on getting him in cuffs because it felt like it was only a matter of time before he actually crossed the line and did hurt someone. Even though he took his time to show up, the cop was really helpful and reassuring. He gave me his cell number to call him directly the next time the man walked into the store. It must have been pretty serious because the guy actually had a real detective assigned to his case. Although I didn't hear about it afterwards, I sincerely hope the guy never crossed that line and actually hurt a girl with any of the items he ended up stealing. More than a decade ago, on one of the hottest days of the year, I was taking my kids down to the 7-Eleven near our apartment block to grab some big gulps. Just as we were walking past a public park right near a tree line, this completely normal, well-dressed looking couple emerged from the trees and started walking right towards us. I actually couldn't believe it when the guy suddenly told him to give him my wallet and anything else in my pockets. I really thought it was like a dumb joke of some kind. They looked so well-dressed they should have been in the office working or something. I actually let out this nervous laughter, then asked if they were serious. The guy answered my question by pulling out what looked like a fishing knife from his jacket pocket. When he opened it and pointed it at me, I shoved my daughter behind me to protect her as best I could. Then, just as I was going to do the same for my son, the woman grabbed his other arm and began pulling him towards her. I honestly felt like my heart was about to explode with fear. There's no other way of describing it. I suddenly just lost all sense of self-preservation as I leapt forward to attack this well-to-do looking woman who just grabbed my boy. The next thing I knew, I felt what I could only describe as a cold punch under the ribs of my left side. I looked down to see the guy had buried his fishing knife in my stomach. What came next felt like a little bit of divine intervention, honestly. 2 joggers had spotted what was going on and came over to intervene. This scared off at least one of the unassuming muggers. As I turned to check on my kids, though, I felt my legs fall out from underneath me and I hit the ground hard. I remember hearing someone screaming and thinking it was my daughter. When I looked, the woman who had grabbed my son was on the ground though, crying and wailing with blood pouring from her mouth. Honestly, I didn't remember hitting her, but she seemed pretty adamant that I did. She was actually trying to make it out like she was the victim of the whole situation. Maybe trying to avoid getting arrested when the cops finally showed up. The police that patrolled that park showed up not long after. The cops actually started asking the woman what happened, like if we were a couple or something. My kids had to tell them that she was the partner of the guy that had stabbed me. This definitely threw the joggers off too, because they must have assumed that was the case as well. The whole time, I just kept begging someone to call the ambulance. I was pretty sure I was bleeding to death. I got taken to the hospital, and to my complete disbelief, I was questioned about the whole thing as though I was a suspect. I had no idea what this was about until a while after. It looked more and more likely I was going to be charged with battery for the woman, since it turned out she was actually from a decently well-off family and gotten into some vicious cycle of addiction with some trust fund junkie she'd met in the city. Her family actually tried to sue me when the charges didn't stick, but it was thrown out and she was sentenced for attempted kidnapping not long after. As for me, I had a tube in my chest for 2 weeks after surgery to remove the knife, but thankfully I made a full recovery. Honestly, when I look back on it, I'm just glad my kids didn't get hurt in any way, and I still run through all the horrific scenarios in my head where we didn't walk away from that situation relatively unscathed. I work at a 7-Eleven part-time in between classes. Earlier this year, we got a little rush of customers in the early afternoon one time. I served 2 guys for coffee and smokes, and at the back of the line, there was this tiny kid, no older than maybe 11 or 12, just waiting there patiently with a backpack in his hand. Honestly, I thought they looked kind of cute, like a little gentleman doing some grocery shopping for his mom or something. When he got to the front of the line, I asked him, "What can I help you with, sir?" in a kind of joking, playful way. Without a hint of emotion on his face, he reached into his backpack and suddenly pulled out a gun. "Give me all the money." When he pointed it at me, I wasn't sure if it was real or not. Where the hell would a 12-year-old kid get their hands on a loaded gun like that? It's not like the 7-Eleven I work at is in a high-crime area either. It's actually located in a pretty nice place, and although I've heard 1 or 2 stories from coworkers about some trouble at the store, nothing had ever happened like this. There was one other guy in the store at the time. I looked over at him to see him kind of smiling at the kid, smiling and frowning, like he was amused but disapproved of this kid playing a dumb childish prank. I don't know about guns, but I figured this guy must have, so I tried calling the kid's bluff. "You shouldn't point toys like that, sweetheart. Cops might think it's real or something." The kid then responded by cocking the gun. There was a real metallic sound that sent a shock of fear running through me. I knew no toy guns made that kind of sound. As if to illustrate he wasn't joking around, the kid pointed the gun in the air and fired a shot that went right past my head. After my ears got done ringing and I came to, I heard once again, "Give me all the money," in the same monotone, emotionless way. I didn't hesitate in doing what he asked. I put as much cash as I could onto the countertop, then watched him fill his backpack with it before he walked out of the store. I think the thing that scared me so much about this, though, was that the kid didn't seem to understand the gravity of the situation. He definitely seemed like he had something missing about him, like he didn't understand he could have actually killed someone over whatever dumb thing he wanted to buy with that money, be it video games or candy or whatever it was. At least a grown-up armed robber understands a gun is a means of getting what they want, and it's not a good idea to just fire it whenever, just in case they accidentally shoot someone in the face at the very least. I get the feeling though that if I'd even try to resist or tell the kid no at all, he'd just shoot me in the face because it's what he assumed he should do. It's almost surreal to me now. The closest I'd ever come to death is at the hands of a small child, someone who should have been so innocent and carefree and full of love, but instead felt nothing. I had a guy come into the 7-Eleven I was working at, and when I was ringing up the items he wanted, he started getting all fresh with me, saying stuff like, "You're real pretty," and "What time do you finish work?" I lied to him and told him I was on till 11, even though I was finishing at 6, which was only about an hour away. He said he'd come back then, and we could go out for a beer or something. I advised him not to, since my boyfriend would be coming to pick me up around then, and he wouldn't like the idea of some random guy hitting on me. That didn't seem to bother this man too much though, as he made some dumb comment about how he'd make my boyfriend see things his way or something. I just nodded and ignored him. I could see him getting kind of angry before he walked out of the store. It didn't bother me too much though, as he was only going to come back to the store later to find out I wasn't even there. By that time, I'd be safe at home and away from this creepy pervert. At 6, when my shift finished, I walked outside with my purse, only to see a car door open about 20 or 30 feet away. I swear, I felt my stomach tie into knots when I saw that same man step outside. I did a straight 180-degree turn on my heels and started walking back into the store. I went right behind the counter, into the manager's office, after telling my coworker, "Just say I'm on break, okay?" He seemed real confused for a second, but as I shut the door and listened right at the edge of it, it was only 30 or so seconds at the most before I heard him say, "Oh, her? She's just on break. I'm sure she'll be on in a minute." Normally, I'd take the bus home, but that night I knew I'd have to get an Uber if I wanted to make it home at all without being seriously harmed. I called the Uber and waited for it to arrive. Then I tried to rush out as fast as I could. I didn't see the guy in the store anymore. I asked my coworker real quick as I was leaving, "Is that guy waiting for me?" He shook his head, still confused but now getting the gist of what was actually happening. They asked if I wanted them to call the cops, and shook my head, just gunning for my Uber. As I pushed open the glass door, I couldn't see the guy anywhere in the lot. I was so set on getting outside that I didn't look left or right as I walked out of the 7-Eleven. I had no warning because of this when the guy grabbed my arm from behind and jerked me backward. He looked really, really angry, and he growled at me. "You lied to me." He then called me a bunch of names as I tried pulling away from him. Luckily, my Uber driver saw absolutely everything. He jumped out of his car. "Hey, let her go right now or I'll call the cops." He did let me go. He smiled at the Uber driver as he told me, "This isn't over. I don't like being lied to." I wish that was just bluster, like he was trying to act hard to save a little face, but it was not. For the next 3 months, he made my life a living hell. He kept on waiting outside of the 7-Eleven to the point where I had to blow a ton of my wages on Ubers to and from work. Then there was the time he actually tried to follow me home. I had to tell the Uber driver what was happening so he could drive into the city just to shake the guy's tail. I tipped that guy massively, even though he initially refused to even accept payment for the ride. He insisted on canceling until I burst into tears and begged him to take the money and my tip. I couldn't make this someone else's problem. I couldn't have that on my mind, as well as all this other stuff. I actually developed something of a relationship with that one specific Uber driver. He became like a father figure to me, who always accepted my ride requests whenever he was working, and made sure no one tried to follow me home. He was also the guy that told me I needed to get the cops involved. He thought this guy was really going to hurt me. He knew people with the same mentality, and they only ever gave up when the law got involved. I didn't even know why I was surprised, when I found out the guy had a previous conviction for stalking. He seemed to know the legal process like the back of his hand. He knew the process of getting a restraining order through the courts could take weeks at minimum. He'd come visit me at the 7-Eleven just to taunt me sometimes, and only leave once I threatened to call the cops on him. That was just about the only thing that really seemed to get to him too. The fact that he'd been arrested and convicted over something like that before. I wanted to tell him that he was pathetic, that he'd never have a good normal woman all to himself. He'd always be some kind of deranged psycho who got off on terrorizing those who couldn't defend themselves. But I didn't. In fact, I was told by one of the cops I spoke to not to antagonize him under any circumstances. We don't know how far he'll push this if you make him angry. If it's possible, don't engage with him whatsoever. Like I said, that was my life for a whole 3 months. Until the day finally came when my mom got the call from our family's attorney, saying a judge had finally approved the restraining order. For those wondering, it took so long because this guy had no history of actual violence, and the whole grabbing incident wasn't classed as an assault for whatever reason. The day it finally came, though, he must have gotten some kind of notification because he just stopped showing up altogether. Seeing him waiting outside whenever I finished was such a regular occurrence that when he finally didn't show up, I actually cried with relief. I told Carl, the Uber driver, that I thought I was finally free. We had a kind of celebration on that final drive back to my house. He still picks me up from time to time too, when I've been out drinking with my friends or for whatever. It's awesome to be reunited with him after such a sickening ordeal. I suppose half the reason I'm sharing this is to help other girls avoid going through the same thing I did. Don't hesitate to get the cops involved with something like a stalking issue. There are literally laws in place to help deal with things like that. But the big thing is don't ever show a soft side or seem like you're playing hard to get. If a guy shows you any unwanted attention, make it clear you'll just call the cops right away. Heck, carry a stun gun or pepper spray if you're legally able to, just to show that son of a bitch you're carrying so they leave you alone. I just don't want anyone else to go through what I went through, because honestly, I lost 4 months of my life to this guy's abuse. I have to start out by saying right away that I'm rather happily employed. I make decent money, and my family is very well taken care of. Unfortunately, however, that was not always the case. This story happened near the beginning of the Great Recession. I'm sure a lot of people can remember how bad things were at the time. I worked as a facilitator in a call center company. My entire job was training people about how to work on the phones. It was a 3-week course for each class, and once it was done, it started over with a brand new class. At some point, the company decided not to use full-time facilitators anymore. Apparently, they considered us some money drain or something. What they did instead was use call center workers in the summer and fall to do the training. They were paid less than we were and didn't get a bonus for doing the training either, so off we went. I had severance for a few months, but that was hardly a comfort. I had children, and I needed to find a job in order to take care of them. Everyone at the time was cutting employees, not hiring them, so I was not having any luck in finding a new job. When I was in the parking lot of a grocery store, a friend of mine came over to talk to me. She was one of those kind of annoying people who always trapped you in a conversation and wouldn't let you go. She was also kind of weird and into some shady things every now and then. I knew that she sold drugs on the side because she had offered me some in the past. Of course, I declined, and she'd since stopped talking about it. This time, though, she asked me if I had found a new job yet. I told her that I did not, and it was getting a bit difficult, as the severance money was quickly running out. I had no idea what I was going to do if I couldn't find a job before that and my savings were depleted. That was when she told me that she might be able to help me find a new job. I was somewhat dubious about this offer, considering her history, and insisted I did not want to do anything illegal. She reassured me though that it wasn't anything like that. She took out this piece of paper with a phone number on it and told me to call that number and mentioned that she was the one who had told me to call. Then, for the first time ever, she left the talk before I did. That was really quite strange for her, and I didn't know what to think about it. After a while, I decided it couldn't hurt to just try out the number though and see what exactly was going on here. I called, and someone picked up on the second ring. They gave me the name of the business, something I had never heard of before, and asked how they could help me. I gave them all the information my friend had given me, and they told me they could set up an interview the very next day. I was given an address, and they hung up the phone soon after. I was quite excited because everything seemed to be very legit, and I really had not expected it to be. I would be able to go to the interview immediately after I dropped the kids off at school. I didn't have a GPS or anything, so I had to find the place on my own. I drove, and when I was getting closer, I realized this was in a rather seedy part of town. In fact, it was an area with a lot of industrial buildings that had been closed down. Therefore, there was basically no traffic or cars or anything in the area. I kept checking the different addresses, trying to find the right one. Eventually, I did find it, because I recalled the name of the company. What stood out the most to me upon pulling up to this address was that there were no cars in the lot at all. I guessed to myself that maybe the employees parked in the back or something. I didn't give it too much thought because the business could definitely still be running even with some other closed ones in the area. I got parked at what was marked as a spot for guests. Then I got out of the car. I walked up to the building, but as I did, I started to get very nervous. It didn't look like anyone was inside, and it was very scary walking up to it like this all alone. I walked up to the door and opened it. It was unlocked, and at first I breathed a sigh of relief. I was initially thinking I had been sent to a closed building. I went inside, and my relief quickly left me. There was no one at the reception desk. There were not any lights on, and the place was definitely deserted. I walked over to the elevator, pushing the button. Maybe the reception area was simply closed, but the place I was supposed to work at was further in and open. When I pressed the button though, to my surprise, there was no power, and the elevator did nothing. I stood there for a moment, not exactly sure what I was going to do, and that's when I heard it. I heard a voice saying something in the distance. I couldn't totally make it out. It seemed to be coming from the staircase beside the elevators. I decided to go and open the door and try to hear what was being said. I opened the door and immediately wished that I had not. A loud voice was coming from below, chanting over and over, "It's for you, Lord. Come to me, Lord. It's for you." The voice was coming from down the stairs in the basement of the building. I was frozen for a moment and decided to close the door quietly. I didn't know what was going on in that basement, but it certainly had nothing to do with any job interviews. I intended to walk out of the building quietly, but my fear got the best of me. I sprinted out and got into my car. As I was driving out, I noticed several people now standing in front of the building, watching me leave. They weren't dressed like business people though. They were all wearing these sort of robes or something. They just watched me as I left, and I sped away from this freaky as fuck sight. When I got home, I went to call my friend who had suggested that I go there in the first place. She didn't answer the phone though. She didn't return my message, and I never spoke to her or saw her again. I have no idea what really happened that day, and I really hope that I never find out. I work out a lot. I've always been really obsessed with staying fit. I have also had training in wrestling and some martial arts. Although I don't particularly like the idea of fighting, I think I could do more than just hold my own in a fight. This is pretty important to know, because it makes my story that much scarier. Now, this happened in the fall, so of course the sun had been setting a whole lot earlier. I like to get out and jog right before the sun set, because it was nice to watch the fall sunset while I was exercising. So there I was, jogging, when I decided to cut through this park. It was a pretty big area, with a path running through the forest. When you came out of that wooded area, the path went by this big field with a children's playground right in the middle. When I was running past this playground, I stopped to get a brief look at the sunset. When I did, I noticed that there was a lone kid at the playground. They looked pretty young, and I thought it was weird they were out so late by themselves. I was just about to start jogging again when I noticed something else. There was a strange man standing just outside of the playground. He moved forward a bit and leaned against the swing set for a while. I don't know why I stood there and kept watching, but there was something about this guy that made me feel pretty uneasy. I wasn't sure if he had seen me yet or not, because his back was facing me the whole time. But he certainly hadn't been on the playground when I first showed up, so I doubted he was the parent of this lone child. The man walked up to the kid, and they looked like they were talking. I noticed the kid back off a little from the man, and the kid looked quite scared. I began to get quite concerned. I wasn't sure how I should tackle the situation yet. The kid stood up and began to back away from the man. I thought I should go up to them and see what was wrong. I began lightly jogging up to the playground. In a split second, however, the man grabbed the kid by the arm. The kid was doing his best to struggle and move away, but the man had a good grip on him. The kid began yelling, and I realized this person was either an abusive parent or a child abductor. I had to do something right now. I ran up to the guy and grabbed the arm that was grabbing the kid. I jerked his arm away. The kid got loose and fell to the ground. I twirled the guy around, so he was now facing me. I got a good look at his face. He was certainly a scary-looking man. He was thin and pale and looked like he hadn't been washed in quite some time. It was nasty looking, but the worst part were his eyes, which were totally crazed. The man, who was much smaller than me, turned his attention away from the child and jumped on me. He tried to knock me over. I was surprised because I was much bigger than him, but somehow he succeeded in taking me to the ground. The man was abnormally strong, and the fight was one of the hardest ones I've ever had in my life. He was screaming something about needing blood or something like that. After a struggle, I was able to subdue him by flipping him over onto his stomach and holding his arms behind his back with my left hand and knee. I tossed my cell phone over to the child and told him to call 911 right away. He didn't hesitate to do so. I held the still struggling man down until the police arrived. They took over from there and arrested him soon after. That's not the end of the story though. I was there when the kid was talking to the cops, and the story he told them was quite scary. He told the police that the man had suddenly approached him, asking to play a game together. The kid was put off right away. He didn't want to play with this stranger, especially a stranger as freaky as this guy was. When the child backed off, the man grabbed him and started growling in his face, telling him that he kept seeing scary things. He told the kid he needed to drain all of his blood in order to make the visions go away. The guy was on some pretty serious drugs and was also mentally ill. I guess he suffered from schizophrenia or something, and the drugs made it worse. I heard he might have been on PCP or something. It was the first time I'd ever been around someone who was so high on drugs. It also explains how that little man was able to put up such a good fight with me. It chilled me to think about the fight after that, because who knows what would have happened if he had managed to win. Most fortunately though, the kid was alright in the end. I checked up with him later, and he wasn't too mentally scarred about the whole thing, so that's the most important in the end, I guess. Now, I'm not 100% certain if these two events are correlated, but they certainly might be. I had an extremely messy breakup with a girl when I was in my 20s, which is quite a long time ago now. It was like something you might see out of a movie. We yelled, we screamed, we called names and threw things at each other. It ended with her and I mutually screaming as she left the house. I was at the door, screaming back as she walked to her car, and supposedly drove her way out of my life. I didn't hear from her for the rest of the week. In fact, I was quite relieved not to. I knew it would just lead to more drama in the end. I was hoping that everything would get back to normal and I would never see her again. So it was on the weekend when I was home by myself that I had an experience that part of me thinks was instigated by her. I had gotten home pretty late on a Saturday night after having been out at bars with some friends of mine. I wasn't ready to go to bed just yet, so I decided to keep having a few drinks in my home. Hey, I knew I was going to pay for it in the morning, but that was fine with me at the time. I had my television beside the window that faced out in my living room. That way I could just look over and see what was going on outside. Not that much was actually going on ever, but if it was, I would know about it right away. I guess you could also say I'm kind of paranoid, and if I'm watching TV and someone comes to the door, I want to be able to see who it is before they get there. Normally, I don't pay that much attention if I see someone just walking on the sidewalk in front of my house or something though. It's normal that kids and random people do that. This night, however, I did take notice of a particular person passing by. It was because this guy was very large and scary looking. He was also overly dressed for what the weather was like. What really got my attention though was that he kept glancing over at my house. I wasn't sure if he could see me or not, but I could sure see him. After the glances over to my house, he kept on walking on his way. I found that quite strange, but I soon put it out of my mind and went back to watching TV for a while. Feeling that I wanted another drink, I got up to go to the kitchen. There was a sliding glass door facing my backyard. I didn't normally pay much attention to my backyard, but when I turned out the lights this time, I don't know why, but I glanced over into the backyard out of instinct. At first, I couldn't quite make out what I was seeing, but I soon knew that it looked like someone or something was in my backyard. There was a shadowy figure. For a few moments, I thought it might be my eyes playing tricks on me in the dark. I walked up closer to the window to get a better look. When I tried my porch light, it wouldn't turn on because the bulb was out. I was looking and realized that there was indeed someone in my backyard. They were standing far enough back in the dark that I couldn't see them clearly, but it looked like a large man. My mind immediately went back to the man I had seen walking in front of my house earlier. He must have realized I'd seen him because he began moving quickly toward the door. The door fortunately was closed, but it was not locked. I had to move very quickly to flick the lock. Fortunately, I did so before the man grabbed the handle. At this point, I was able to get a good look at the man. He was huge, wearing a black jacket. His jacket opened as he moved, and I saw a large knife hidden inside. That scared the crap out of me. The man started tugging at the handle of the door. Although it was locked, he was mercilessly pulling on it. I was afraid he might easily break the lock and force himself through. I ran to the living room closet and grabbed something in there that I had to protect myself. I kept hearing him pulling on that door handle and eventually heard the lock break and the door open. He got into my house. I stood in the doorway of the closet as the man entered. When I saw him, he'd already pulled his knife out of his sheath. When he saw me though, he stopped in his tracks when he saw my gun pointing straight at him. "Get the fuck out of my house," I breathed. Suddenly, I was the one with more power, but I was still terrified. I didn't really know if I could shoot someone. I had never been in a situation to shoot anything other than a target. I just hoped the man wouldn't hear the fear in my voice. He took one step forward toward me, as if daring me to shoot at him. At that moment, it seemed like my body just took over, and I pulled the trigger. The man was hit in his left arm. He quickly recoiled and yelled in pain. However, he didn't keep still very long. He got up and ran out the back door of the house. I actually stood there for God knows how long, terrified about what just happened. I knew I needed to get up and call the police, but I was just frozen in place with that gun for a while. Finally, I did call. They looked around and I gave a description of the man. Interestingly enough, the guy was soon picked up when he was found lurking behind a convenience store. I actually had to go to the precinct, and there was a lineup. I was able to identify him quickly. The reason I brought my girlfriend up in the beginning was that she knew this guy. I suspected she had set this up, but that was never proven, and she was never arrested. The attacker did get a jail sentence for aggravated assault, so I guess there's some justice in that. We're going back almost 10 years ago now. One morning, I dropped my son off at school, then drove over to a nearby 7-Eleven with my infant daughter. It was pretty early in the morning, so there were only 1 or 2 other customers. One of them was an older-looking man with a walker who was slowly making his way around the store. I didn't pay too much attention to him, other than feeling kind of sorry for him. I picked up the few items I needed and headed out to my car. Right as I was putting my daughter in her car seat, I heard a voice call out from behind me. I turn and it's the old man with a walker. Only there's something weirdly different about him now than when I saw him inside the store. He was walking straight upright, not leaning on the walker, and his voice sounded much younger than you would have expected from looking at him. I remember him saying, "Cute kid, huh?" Then, as I turned around, I only got the slightest look at the man in his brand new posture before he slammed the walker into the back of my legs. The force made my knees buckle, and I almost fell right on top of my young daughter. I'm not exactly the tallest woman in the world, so the height reduction from my knees buckling had me falling forward into my open car. I tried really hard not to crush her as I fell. I honestly thought he was trying to get me, which was bad enough, but when he grabbed me by the hair and started to drag me up and off my daughter, I realized he was trying to get her instead. I honestly didn't think I could get any more terrified, but the realization he was actually trying to take my infant daughter away from me was too much to bear. I remember letting out the loudest, most ear-splitting scream I've ever let out in my life, begging him not to take my baby. He was so much stronger and faster than he looked. I guess that was all part of his fiendish scheme, to have everyone let their guards down around him. It honestly seems like divine intervention now that I look back at it, but someone was just pulling into the small parking lot, just as he almost had a hand on my daughter. Seeing the struggle, they instinctively honked their horn over and over in a bid to break us up. I think they must have figured at first it was just an incident of spousal abuse or something, because they were only honking and didn't get out of their car. That was until I started screaming, "He's trying to take my baby!" The moment they heard that, they burst out of their driver's side door. The man sprinted past the passenger side and out towards the main highway. The second he did, another car came speeding by and stopped him. I first thought it might have been another person coming to tackle him or something, but instead the guy climbed into the second car and it sped off with a screech of its tires. What horrified me in the aftermath was that this was quite clearly a well-planned and almost perfectly executed attempt to kidnap my daughter. I wouldn't be surprised in the least if it had worked on a previous occasion. After the kind stranger calmed me down, they helped me call the cops, and I tried my best to calm my daughter down in turn. She was still too young to know what was really going on, but she'd picked up on my distress enough to be wailing and crying until I managed to lull her to sleep. The cops who arrived at the 7-Eleven a short while after said they'd never heard of such a thing happening there before, but they were able to check the cameras outside to try and get a clear image of the getaway car's license plate. I stuck around long enough to find out the car's plates came back as stolen. The cop I spoke to said there was a good chance they'd just ditched the vehicle somewhere after wiping it down for prints. If they'd already planned such a detailed operation here, there was a good chance they'd planned for it failing too. The only saving grace was that the officer assured me that my report was a step towards catching them. A small step, but a step nonetheless. The horrifying experience I went through that morning was not for nothing, as not only did the cops now have a description of the man who tried the kidnapping, but their failure to kidnap my daughter meant they'd probably think twice before trying the same plan on someone else. I took a lot of comfort in that idea. If it wasn't for the cop taking the time to reassure me of that, I don't think I'd have dealt with the trauma half as well as I did in the months that followed. I did a lot of praying too, of course. Desperate prayers that whoever had planned such a horrifying kidnapping would never ever be successful, and that no one else would have to endure the pure horror I did that day. I was 18 and had just graduated high school when this happened. A bit of backstory. I was bullied pretty heavily throughout my 4 years of high school for my weight. I wasn't huge by any standard, but even if I was, that shouldn't have made it okay to be tormented in the way that I was. I was slightly overweight, but I live in a very small town in the Midwest. My graduating class had only maybe 60 people or so. I have no idea why I seemed to be the only target when it came to relentless harassment about my weight, when there were other people that were even bigger than me. But either way, it made me feel incredibly insecure. It had gotten to a point where I wasn't just bullied by the awful people at my school, but I also continued the cycle against myself when I got home. I was disgusted by what I saw in the mirror. I would come home crying almost every day after school, and the only thing I ever dreamt of was simply being fit. That's all I wanted. I figured that once I finally got skinny, I could rub it in the faces of everyone who ever said I couldn't do it. The month that I graduated high school, I decided it was time for the big change. I was done feeling sorry for myself, and frankly, I just wanted to be healthier. I felt like putting all my energy into becoming a better me. I knew that I could do it, and it would make me feel worthy again. I talked to my mom about it, and she suggested getting a gym membership. She even said she would pay for it, as a sort of graduation present from her and my dad. Of course, I wanted to take her up on the offer, but at the same time, I'd always been kind of creeped out by our local gym. It was in this very small building in a very sketchy part of town. Then again, pretty much every part of our town was the sketchy part of town. I guess you could say in the end I went against my better judgment though, and the next day I found myself at that gym, waiting at the counter for someone to help me sign up. A short, heavy, older man came out of the back room and sat down at a desk nearby. He didn't strike me as someone who would be running a gym, let alone being in one, but I had no right to be judgmental myself. I brushed it off and didn't give it too much thought. He told me the rates and said the gym was the best in town, which sort of made me laugh a little because it was the only gym in town. He really didn't seem to like that though. His voice was raspy from cigarettes, and I could smell his breath all over him. "What's so funny, huh? You don't think my gym's very nice? You know, you don't have to be here, little girl." I stopped laughing quickly, confused by how harsh he was being. I was very quick to apologize. "Oh, no, your gym's very nice. That's why I chose it. I mean, no offense, sir. I'm really sorry about that." He chuckled a bit and said, "I was just messing with you, princess. Lighten up a little," and a wink soon after. I remember feeling extremely creeped out by him. I didn't like the vibe that he was giving me. But at this point, I'd already signed up for the next month, so I was going to be going. I wasn't going to waste money, and also, part of me felt like maybe I was reading too much into things. It's not like I would have to go through spending much time with the guy at the gym anyway. He didn't seem particularly bad or anything. I guess it was just a little off-putting with his sense of humor was all. I thanked him and walked out of the gym, eager to put some space in between us. I had made some plans to work out that day, but I was having a bit too much anxiety from that encounter. So I went home and decided to do it tomorrow morning. First things first, I woke up and actually was very excited for once. Got my gym bag all ready and headed out on my way. I grabbed a smoothie on the way for breakfast, and by about 9 a.m. I was in the parking lot of the gym. Before I even walked in, I saw the very same man working the front desk. There were a few other people in there this time, so I didn't feel as uncomfortable going in. I pulled open the door and scanned my card before I walked to the door of the woman's locker room. The man working the front desk rushed into his office only a few moments after I went into the locker room, which I found a little bit odd. But, it's his job, so whatever. I think I should mention that his office was directly next to the woman's locker room. I put my belongings in the locker after quickly getting changed into my gym clothes and locked it with a lock I had brought from home. For the next several hours, I worked out a bit and listened to some music. I tried thinking about how life was going to be when I went off to college in a few months. By around 12 p.m. or so, I was done with my workout and ready to head home. I started making my way toward the locker room to change my clothes again and grab my things before heading out. As I did so, though, I noticed that the front desk man rushed to enter his office again at exactly the same time. That was certainly very strange. For the next few weeks or so, every time I went into the locker room, the man at the front desk would go into his office at the same time. It started feeling less like a coincidence and more like a deliberate act. It wasn't just me either. This happened whenever any attractive woman would enter the locker room. He would always go into his office in a hurry. There were a few times I could hear the man coughing from inside, and occasionally there would be a tapping sound coming from the wall the mirror was situated on. At first, I chalked it up to thin walls and tried to move on. After 3 weeks of going to the gym every day, though, one of my very close friends told me he'd seen a picture of me getting dressed circulating around one of the Facebook groups he was in. It was a group of a bunch of other men from around town who posted jobs they were offering or work they were looking for. So when a picture of me randomly showed up there, he knew something was very off. He showed me the picture, and I was completely shocked. It was a picture of me getting dressed at the gym. The worst part is that for the life of me, I couldn't figure out how the person had even taken the picture in the first place. Because of my insecurity, I never got dressed at the gym unless no one was in the room with me. If there was even one other woman in the room, I would wait until she left before I got dressed, which also meant it was only me in this picture. My friend showed me that this wasn't the only photo uploaded either. There were almost 30 photos of women from our town getting dressed inside this same gym locker room. Some were more undressed than others. Thankfully, the comments were mostly people telling him to take down the post immediately, but there were a few gross ones as well. Lots of men saying it was sexy the women didn't know they were getting pictures taken of them. I was disgusted. Thankfully, my photo wasn't of me completely exposed, but for some of the women it was. I started to feel sick to my stomach. It was supposed to be a safe place. I knew I had to go to the police. I wasn't just going to sit around and watch these pictures, including mine, be passed around for everyone to see. By the time I'd mustered up the courage to call, though, I was informed they already knew about what was going on, and they would take my statement if I wanted to come down to the gym and to answer some questions. You may find that weird, but like I said, it was a very small town, so when something like this happened, every available cop was on it right away. It was the most action they'd see all year. I went down and answered whatever questions they asked. I learned that the reason the front desk man was always going into his office when I or other women would enter the locker room was because connecting his office and the woman's locker room was a two-way mirror. We couldn't see him, but he could see every inch of us. Why he decided to post these pictures, I don't know. He had to have known he would get caught, and during the trial he said he didn't regret it one bit. He even said that he thought all the women wanted him, and that's why they signed up for memberships at his gym in the first place. He was definitely some type of narcissist, mentally ill in some fashion. He ended up being sentenced to 3 years in state prison, where he's still currently residing. The experience was quite frightening and made me feel gross for a long time. I didn't let it discourage me though. I joined another gym a couple of towns away and ended up falling completely in love with weightlifting. There's one warning I'd like to give to women and men alike. If you're ever getting undressed in a place you aren't familiar with, always check the mirror. You never know if there could be another person peering at you through that glass. Being a personal trainer is relatively easy work. I'm only in my mid-20s, so I haven't been doing it for very long, but it's great being able to help people work towards achieving their goals in a healthy, safe way, free from any judgment or harassment. What I didn't expect is all the attention I would get from women and their husbands. You see, most of my clients are women, married women, and their husbands don't seem to like another man watching their wives work out or helping them with their form. Now, that's completely fair, I understand to a certain extent, but I've never had an outright issue with any of them. I can always feel the awkward tension when they're working out though, keeping an eye on us. I've never done anything, but nothing could have prepared me for this one instance. As a man, I had never really worried about being followed at night or having someone become obsessed with me to the point where I felt like I was being stalked. But that's exactly what happened. I had a client that was moving out of town, so a spot opened up on my client list. The gym I worked at had a board that I was able to put a little sign on. Basically, it just said a new spot was open and had a location where to email me. I got around 20 or so emails from people looking for a personal trainer, but to be as fair as possible, I went with the first person who actually reached out. She was a woman in her early 30s named May. She told me she and her husband had just had a baby the year before, and she was looking to lose her baby weight and be comfortable with her body again. Our first session was pretty normal. I set up a pretty low-key workout plan for her that she completed with ease in about an hour and a half or so. Now, just so you understand where my shock at this situation came from, let me tell you just how ordinary May came off in the very beginning. During the first few sessions, all she would talk about was how much she loved her family and how amazing her husband Jacob was. She would tell me all the romantic things he would do for her and spend at least 15 minutes every session showing me pictures of her baby. I found this pretty endearing. I was pretty used to people telling me about their personal lives while they train, given that there's not much else to talk about, and I'm sure it eased their anxiety to talk about the people they loved. Personally, I'm not one to talk about myself while working with clients, and that's never been an issue before. I'd say around our 5th session or so, though, May began insisting I tell her about myself. She started saying things like, "A man like you surely has a beautiful woman in your life. I bet your girlfriend feels super lucky to have someone as sexy as you." I wasn't worried about the comments in the moment though, as things like that I'd heard from most of my clients. Usually I'd laugh it off and nothing would happen. Only this time when I tried to do the same thing, she gave me this very serious look and with a stern voice said, "Well, are you gonna tell me about her or not?" I was a little off guard by her sudden change in demeanor, so it took me a second to answer. I don't have a girlfriend. As you can see, I'm a little too busy for relationships at the moment. And, besides, I have enough women in my life with all these clients I have to take care of." The last part was meant to be a joke, but I could tell she was obviously not taking it as one. "You only have a few female clients, don't you? What are you, some kind of pervert that likes to prey on vulnerable women?" That's when I started getting a bit uncomfortable. I'm not one for confrontation, so I didn't say anything at first, but she continued to insult me. I couldn't just stand there as she demeaned me in front of multiple people in the gym, who were now staring at us. "Look, I don't appreciate that shit you're saying, so I'm gonna have to ask you to leave if you don't stop. I don't talk about my personal life, and this is the reason why. I've never done anything to you, so I hope you calm down and recognize how inappropriate this is." I think that really embarrassed her. Her raising her voice at me got the attention of most of the people around us, so when I confronted her, everyone was looking. She picked up her bag and left immediately. To be completely honest with you, I assumed that would be the last time I ever saw or heard from her. The whole experience was of course awkward. I had multiple people come up to me afterwards and ask what the hell that was all about. I did get an email from her a couple of days later. but it didn't sit quite right with me. "Hi, it's May. I'm really sorry for what happened a couple of days ago at the gym. I kinda lost it when you mentioned the other woman you train. I hate the thought of you around another woman, touching her while she works out the way you touch me. I guess I got a little bit jealous being around you. The past few weeks have made me realize how much I want you, how much I need you. I thought you wanted me too. I could see the way you looked at me, scanning every inch of my body from the moment we first met. I know my feelings can't be one-sided." Yeah, this did freak me out a little bit, especially because I had no fucking idea what she was talking about. I basically just interacted with her completely normally. I never touched her at all, unless it was to correct her form, and even then it was just like her lower legs or her arms or something. I never touched anybody in a place that would be considered inappropriate or possibly make them feel uncomfortable. When I read that email, I started to really worry that maybe I'd done something wrong. I had no idea she'd gotten such an impression from me. Everything had always seemed so normal. I emailed her back and, in the nicest way possible, told her I had no such feelings for her. Everything I was doing was simply a part of my job, and I was sorry she felt like it was something more than what it was. I also mentioned that it would be a good idea for me to not be her trainer anymore, since I wasn't very comfortable with the way my actions were being misconstrued. I tried keeping it short so nothing could be misunderstood, but the email I got back from her only minutes later made me realize there was nothing I could say to change her mind about me at all. "Oh, I see. This is your work email then. You have to say stuff like this. That's okay. I'll see you later. We can discuss our relationship there." She left it at that. I went into work the next morning and immediately went to see the manager. I told her of everything that happened and showed her the emails. She told me not to worry, but she was glad I'd brought it to her attention. It made me feel a little better about the situation, but something was still bothering me. My next client went in and I went straight to training her. She was an older woman named Nita. Honestly, she reminded me of my grandma who had passed the year before. We had become great friends in the few months I'd been training her, so I had no issue telling her about what was going on with May. She seemed shocked, if anything. She warned me it could quickly turn into something ugly if I wasn't careful. In that moment, I started getting worried. Toward the end of our session, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted May hiding in a corner. She looked down when she noticed I'd spotted her, almost like she really didn't want me to know she was there. After Nita left, I grabbed my bags and started to head out. I decided to stop for some groceries on the way home. Imagine my shock when I ran into May there. She bumped into me and acted like she was surprised to see me, but I knew she'd been following me the entire time. "Who was that woman today at the gym? Are you guys together or something?" I asked her to leave me alone, but it made no difference to her. She grabbed my arm and pulled me back towards her as she began to question me. I slipped out of her grasp and simply ran to my car. She followed me and started apologizing for her behavior while attempting to rub herself against me. She kept on asking why I didn't want her. Before I knew it, she pinned me against my car. I was much stronger than her though, so I did what I had to do and pushed her off me. She fell to the ground, and before she could get up, I got into my car and locked the doors. After I pulled out, I made sure she wasn't still following me and drove right to the police station. I was able to obtain a restraining order against her a few days later. When I showed them all the emails she kept sending, they were able to obtain the security footage from the grocery store as well that showed her following me the entire time. Nothing would stop her though. For several months after, I would see her everywhere I went. Restaurants, bars, the beach, even when I went on a vacation. She just wouldn't leave me alone. Thankfully, the gym I worked at had security, so every time she tried to follow me, she was escorted out of the building. She never tried speaking to me directly again, but honestly, just seeing her everywhere was scary enough. Whenever I called the police to tell them she was there, by the time they arrived, she'd be mysteriously gone. For a year, I was stalked by May after. She sent letters to my home and left gifts on my doorstep, not normal gifts either. She'd leave her dirty underwear or cuttings of her hair and fingernails. It got to the point that whenever I found anything on my doorstep that wasn't something I ordered, I immediately threw it in the dumpster outside. I tried to inform the police, but after the 100th time, they told me I didn't need to tell them about it anymore. They just kept telling me to let them know if she did something physical to me again, and I hated that. I considered moving, but I was stuck in a lease and breaking it was more than I could afford. Thankfully, she never tried to actually break in. Otherwise, I'm sure that would have been the last straw. Over the next couple of months, I became increasingly paranoid. It started affecting my other relationships, and I became a miserable person I didn't even recognize anymore. One day, I stepped outside and noticed it was the first day in a year I hadn't found anything on my doorstep from her. The next day, the same thing. In fact, that whole week I got nothing. I finally stopped seeing her around so much too. In the end, I ended up getting an email from her that said she basically blamed me for her husband divorcing her and getting custody of their children. I quote-unquote tempted her with my body during our sessions, and she couldn't help but pursue me. She said she wanted nothing more to do with me, and told me to leave her alone from then on. It was super confusing, but I was glad it was finally over. I was happy to let her believe I was the bad guy in the situation, if it meant she'd finally fucking leave me alone. I do see her around town every so often, but now she just acts like I don't exist, and I'm very okay with that. My family grew up in the rural area around where we lived. My parents weren't rich or anything, but we did have a fairly decent life. This was in the 70s or so things were a lot different than they are nowadays. It was a lot more common back then to see someone driving down a country road with an open beer between their legs. Although I don't live out in the country now, nor have I in quite a long time, I at least like to think that things like that don't happen nearly as often anymore. I learned to drive myself when I was about 12 years old. This was not unusual for me or my family. And it wasn't too strange either for one of us to take the car out and go somewhere. I had a lot of friends my age who chewed tobacco as well. I tried it a few times, but I didn't really care for it. Around this time, I was good friends with a guy named Vance. We had grown up in the same general area up on the ridge. Our houses weren't really that close together, but we rode the same school bus to school. We were friends all the way from kindergarten until sometime in high school. The reason the two of us stopped being friends in high school was due to a girl he had liked for years liking me even more. Although I wasn't really interested in her and would never have dated someone my friend had his eye on, this made him really angry. After a while, he just kind of stopped talking to me. A while further after that, he became very antagonistic to me as well, which was pretty horrible because no one wants to lose a friend in a situation like that. It's not like I made the girl like me or something. When I was 17 years old, I was home by myself on a weekend night. I decided to take one of the old cars and see a different buddy of mine who lived a bit further up the ridge than I did. It was about an hour's drive to his house, since it was a dark dirt road the entire way there. You had to be real careful out on some of these roads. They were right on the sides of hills, and there was not anything like a guardrail to keep you from driving off the side and dying. When I left that friend's house to go home, it was already pretty late. I went outside and could see it was actually a little bit foggy out. It was not ideal to drive this path in that weather, but it just meant I would have to take my time and be more careful when driving. However, it was not too long after I'd begun that I noticed some lights behind me. Another vehicle was now coming my way. The road wasn't really wide enough for more than a car and a half, so this person could not pass me by. Still though, he didn't stop at all. He drove up upon me really fast. In fact, just before he slowed down, I almost thought he was going to slam into me and shove me off the cliff. He had gotten as close as possible to hitting me, then backed off just a bit. When this person was about a car's length behind me, he started to flash his high beams on. Then he sped up just enough to almost slam into me again. Just before he'd hit me though, he slowed down. Now he kept his high beams on, which made it very difficult for me to see the path ahead. I tried to pull my car over just a bit to let this guy pass me by. I was really trying to let him go, assuming that's what he wanted. This guy made no attempt to pass me though. He did the exact same thing, pulled up really close to me, then backed off again. This time he began to honk his horn angrily as well. I began to get very nervous. Every time this guy repeated this pattern, I got even more scared. I tried to speed up now, which I was very hesitant to do. I didn't like driving fast down these roads, even when there was not any fog. That didn't change anything though. When I sped up, he matched me perfectly. He kept getting close as if he was going to hit me off the side before backing off yet again. He did this over and over, while still honking his horn at me. I don't know how long this kept up, but finally we got into the bottom of the hill, so there was no risk of running off the side anymore. We were still in a highly forested area though. Thankfully, by that point, I was not far away from home. I thought I could make it there, and at least I knew my family would be home by then. If this guy followed me all the way home, my brothers would be there to help me kick the crap out of him. No sooner than that thought entered my head, however, the car did its same pattern again. This time though, it did hit me. I reacted by slamming the brakes, which caused my car to spin and skid off the road. The only thing I remember after that was nothing. I woke up in the hospital 3 months after the accident. My car had slammed right into a big tree. I hadn't been wearing my seatbelt in that moment. The only thing that kept me from flying through the windshield was the big steering wheel that my head and chest had bounced off of. I had some pretty bad head injuries, and I had been out for the entire time. I guess I had opened my eyes after a month, but had not been acting like myself. They told me I was aware, but it was like nobody was there. I don't really remember exactly because it was so many decades ago. I had a violent and sort of feral behavior that required me to be restrained to my bed for a while. Then, suddenly one day, the day I felt like I woke up, I just went back to normal. I never found out exactly who was driving that car that rammed me. However, some other people who knew me in high school later told me that Vance had been bragging that it was him after it happened. Vance's dad worked at the police department, so there was never an investigation to see if he had done it. That, of course, convinced me that he had. I don't live out in the country anymore, but I really hope it's harder these days for crooked people to get away with things like that now. Now, let me first say I know a lot of people might not like this story. I've been listening to scary stories for a while, and it seems like the ones people get most riled up about are the ones about bullies. And this just so happens to be a story about bullies on Halloween. I was picked on for as long as I can remember. Never really had too many friends growing up, and not even nerdy friends. I was mostly one of those kids that just kept to myself. I guess that's why I was bullied so much. I always sat in the back of the classroom and never raised my hand or volunteered to do any group work. In fact, I absolutely despised group work. And besides, no one wanted me in their groups anyway. For the most part, I didn't really care about all this. I just liked living in my own world. It did bring a lot of abuse my way though. There was name-calling, which no matter what people tell you is bad and can hurt you quite deeply, and I would occasionally get shoved down. Although the bullies never did go so far as to try and beat me up or start fights with me. When I was around 14 years old, I was still going through this kind of thing. It bothered me a lot more though, because of course, those are the years boys have tons of testosterone in their system, and they get a lot more mean and aggressive. I started to get a lot more teasing, and really came to hate high school gym class. I was shy about changing in the locker room, and that didn't really help my popularity at all. During the fall, it got a lot worse. I was looking forward to Halloween though. For the first time, I was going to have the house all to myself. My parents were going to be going out to a party. I enjoyed being home alone, and it seemed like Halloween would be the perfect day to do it. We didn't get much trick-or-treat traffic in our neighborhood, but I planned to keep the lights out and pretend nobody was home. I had some movies I was going to watch and just have a quiet and alone night. I was at home watching a movie when I heard the strangest noise. It felt like someone was tapping on my living room window. It got my attention at first, but I figured it must just be an animal or something. I didn't really pay that much attention to it. Another time went by and I heard that same noise again. This time it was coming from a different window though. The exact same noise, same number of taps, just a different area. That was really concerning, and I paid more attention to it this time. I looked over out the window though and was not able to see anything. I tried to pay attention to my movie, but it was hard to get back into it. Just as I was beginning to, I once again heard that tapping noise, except this time when I looked at the window it was coming from, I saw someone outside. It was just for a split second, but I saw them duck down out of sight. I knew immediately what was going on. I had been bullied enough and it was Halloween, so I knew the kids who bullied me were trying to play a cruel prank on me. Well, I was not going to put up with this. I went and turned on some lights to show that someone was home, and then I decided to go to the door and tell the bullies to get the hell off our property, or I was going to call the police. When I opened the front door though, I was cut off before I could say anything. There was a jack-o'-lantern sitting on the front porch, covered in what I thought was fake blood. It had razor blades sticking out of it all over the place. It was lit and smiling at me. That made the entire thing just that much more terrifying. I took it as a threat. I closed the door and immediately went and called the police. I don't think the bullies expected that because they hadn't left yet and were still trying to torment me. They tried to run off when the police arrived quickly. I guess that was my Halloween treat, seeing the police scare the crap out of those bullies who had scared the crap out of me for so many years. My boyfriend showed me this sub a while back, and after lurking for a hot second, I realized I had my own story to tell. The summer of my junior year in high school, I'd been romantically involved with a guy. We'd gotten to the point in our relationship where he was ready for me to meet his friends. We decided it would be cool if we all went to the state fair that was in town for the next few days. With a little bit of planning and corralling, we all hopped into my boyfriend's little Taurus and headed for the city. Keep in mind, we're all a bunch of dumb, edgy teenagers, so a pre-game hot box was a must for any event. With the exception of my boyfriend who was driving, we were all pretty damn high. At one point, one of the girls in the car suggested we pull over and get some snacks from the gas station coming up. For whatever reason, I was the one who managed to get stuck with the job of running in and grabbing what everyone wanted. I was annoyed, but pretty desperate for his friends to think I was cool. I jotted down everyone's requests on my phone and headed inside. I walked up and down a few aisles for a bit, trying to find what I could from the list. Around the end of my little shopping spree, I picked up a bag of chocolate-dipped pretzels and turned to head to checkout. That was when an older man in the row behind me called out and asked me to toss him a bag. I of course thought nothing of this and figured I'd save him the trip and be nice. I threw one over to him. I took my snacks to the counter, and that was when I noticed the man was now following me. He asked me a few questions, like my name and where I was headed with all that food. I don't know if it was because I was blitzed or just stupid, but I happily answered all his questions, even telling him my real name and that I was headed to the fair with some friends. He smiled and told me my name was the same as his daughter's name. He seemed polite enough, maybe a bit too chatty and bad with social cues, but otherwise harmless. It was then that he offered to pay for my things, telling me I should save my money for the fair. I shook my head and insisted it was fine, but thanked him for the offer. He slapped his hand hard on my shoulder. It lingered for a bit too long. He whispered and told me not to move, and he'd get his wallet from his truck. I started to feel a bit uneasy then. I exchanged glances with the woman at the counter, and I could tell the weird feeling was mutual. I tried to use him going to his car as a chance to fish out my money, pay for my shit, and get the fuck out of there. I grabbed my receipt and started sprinting towards the car when the man made a beeline right for me in the parking lot. He wagged his finger and scolded me for leaving without waiting. I uncomfortably laughed it off and told him I should be getting back to my friends. They'd been waiting for a long time. It was then that he steered the conversation away from the snacks and asked me if I wanted to see some pictures of his daughter. He told me he kept them in his glove box, and if I wanted to see them, it would only take a second. Finally, alarms were going off in my stupid head. I declined him and told him I really needed to go right now. He reached a hand out and grabbed me by the arm towards him, repeating over and over again that it would only be a couple of minutes. I panicked and started screaming, trying to yank my arm away. That was just enough of a reaction to start turning heads in the parking lot. The man let go of me and rushed back to his car. Hyperventilating and clutching my bag of snacks, I sprinted to the Taurus, where I was bombarded with questions from my boyfriend and his friends. Apparently, everyone had thought I knew the man up until I started screaming. They intended to come out and help once they realized what was going on, but the interaction had just ended that fast that they were unable to do anything. For a few hours, I considered reporting the incident to someone, but I figured I didn't have enough info or reasoning to justify it. I still can't help but think what would have happened in that parking lot, had it been a little emptier, or if I'd come alone. This story begins about 5 years ago, when I was a junior in high school. There was a boy in my grade, Jack, who didn't have a lot of friends. He's on the lower end of the autism spectrum, what used to be called Asperger's syndrome. That affected his ability to pick up on social cues in his interactions with peers. Although I always knew him to be a bit awkward, he was nice enough, and I felt badly that he spent so much time alone, eating lunch alone, sitting alone at all the school activities. When he joined theater junior year, an activity I'd been a part of since I was 6, I decided to help in bringing him into the fold. Although more creative clubs do have reputations for being more accepting, it's still a difficult thing to join halfway through when everyone is already close-knit friends with everyone else. I would make my best effort to include Jack in conversations with the groups at rehearsals, talk to him one-on-one, invite him to sit with us at lunch. I even gave him my phone number to chat about things once in a while. When he asked me to hang out with him after a month or so of friendship, I said yes. I came to his family's barn and had a very nice time visiting with all the animals and eating dinner with his family. They said a few heartbreaking things throughout the dinner, like it was so nice to see him finally having a friend. They said they liked me much better than the one other friend he had, who I knew to be a kid who also had some disabilities. Unfortunately, this is around the time when our interactions stopped being healthy. He developed a severe attachment to me. It became very clear to me that he saw me in a romantic way, which I didn't return the feelings. Now that wouldn't have been too problematic if he hadn't started to pursue me in such an obsessive manner. He began texting me every hour of the day. If I ever didn't reply, I would receive another text emphasizing his last, or he would copy and paste the same message over and over again. If it were simply him saying hello to start a conversation, he would post it again and again and again until I finally responded. This was not always me ignoring him, mind you. Sometimes I was at work and unable to respond. Then, when I would unlock my phone, I'd have 10 messages from him like this. Additionally, if I did talk to him, he began pouring out every deep thought to me about depression and even having considered suicide in the past. While I'm a compassionate person who will do anything to help others, this worried me for multiple reasons. One, I'm not a trained therapist, and while I can offer some support, I don't always know the right thing to say to help. The last thing I want to do is say the wrong thing and trigger someone into hurting themselves. Additionally, I feared that him sharing these vulnerable thoughts with me and having me comfort him would make him feel as though the bond between us was closer than it was and cause him to latch on even tighter. I tried my best and advised him to speak to our school guidance counselor, which he declined as he claimed that only I could ever understand him. Around this time, he began following me to work. I didn't have a license at the time, so I had to walk from school to my after-school shifts. The store was less than a mile away, so it didn't really bother me. Jack would find me at my locker, and start talking to me on my walk to the front door of the school building. I would say, "Bye, I have to go to work," but instead of waiting for his ride, he would follow behind me through the parking lot, down the street, and the entire way to where I worked. As the store I worked at is one where the customers come up to the counter and can't come inside, he would just lurk around in the parking lot for 20 minutes to half an hour, never buying anything, before eventually turning around and walking back to the school. My manager and I were both very disturbed by this whenever it happened, and I would hide in the back or clean until he left. Then the performance of our musical came, and the creep factor amped up even more. He was still constantly texting me, of course, but at this point I was going through a lot of mental health issues of my own. I didn't really have the patience to deal with this constant bothering. I replied every few days or so, but I wouldn't engage in more than casual conversation. He began to incessantly comment on everything I posted, Instagram, Facebook, responding to every single tweet. In person, he also followed me around constantly. More than once, he'd attempted to barge into the girls' dressing room and made several comments about my body and specifically my breasts to my face during that week. He happened to leave his phone on a table by me, and when I went to return it, I saw his lock screen was a photo that said, "Boobs are like the sun. If you wear sunglasses, you can stare at them as long as you like." As soon as the musical was over, I didn't have to see him on a regular basis and decided to block him on everything. His constant replies were really starting to freak me out. I told him multiple times that I couldn't always be there to talk to him, but he never listened. I blocked his number. Summer was actually quiet. I enjoyed the fact I didn't have to see or hear from him for a long time. Unfortunately, the school year brought back some contact with him, as he was now a recurring member of theater. He tried to confront me about blocking him in front of a large group of people. I just said we could talk about it later, and he failed to bring it back up. 2 weeks later, though, I got a Twitter notification that my phone contact Jack had joined Twitter as a user posing as the school debate team. I also had a notification saying he'd followed me. He made a fake account for a club that didn't even exist at school just in order to follow me. To my advantage, he'd used his real phone number or email when making that account. Therefore, I was able to quickly block him and told my close friends to do the same. For most part, my senior year went mostly quiet, except for an incident where he'd parked right next to me and tried to hit my car. I'm somewhat sure it was just because he's a really bad driver, but I've always had a tinge of doubt in my mind. I wish I could say the story ended there, that his crush just faded out with high school graduation, and the blocks on his account and number gave him enough closure to move on. Fast forward to fall of 2017. It's been about 2.5 years since I graduated from high school. I was going through my account on Twitter and adjusting some things, and saw I still had some people set to notifications that I didn't really talk to anymore. Some people I'd blocked from old grudges that I'd long since gotten over. I saw Jack was still blocked, and figured that everything had occurred so long ago that he must be over it by now. I decided to unblock him, assuming the chances would be rare he would comment or do anything. Likes are innocent enough. How wrong I was. In my defense, it did take him quite a while to notice. Whether I just didn't pop up on his timeline for some time, or he just didn't use those applications for a while. I didn't hear from him until spring of 2018, 3 years after we'd left high school. He commented on something I posted, trying to start an argument. When I responded, he said he could never win an argument against me. Seemed innocent enough. I liked his comment and moved on. The next day, I got a message from him. "I see you're still the same as you were in high school." I responded for a bit and then stopped replying. It was only small talk, but I didn't want to contact him any further. I had a sinking feeling he was falling back in his old pattern. The next day, I got another message. Hey, are you there? I need to tell you something really important." I was taking a nap at the time, so I couldn't respond. 10 minutes later, according to the timestamp, he DM'd me the same message on Instagram and Twitter. Another 5 minutes later, I get the same message as a text, even though I didn't have his number. At this point, all the notifications woke me up. I was annoyed and felt I knew what he was going to say. "I had a huge crush on you in high school, and I still do now." At this point, I was enraged. I hadn't seen him in 3 years, or interacted with him at all during that time. He made my favorite activity stressful and uncomfortable for me. He followed me to work several times. He knows nothing about the person I'd developed into in the years since I graduated. I decided to do what I hadn't done at that point, which was explicitly tell him about how inappropriate everything he'd done was. I knew he had a disability that made it hard for him to tell how people felt about things he said or did, and that's why I felt I needed to be brutally honest. I decided clearly he had some kind of fixation on me that seemed to transcend the boundaries of distance, time, or sight, so I blocked and deleted him on everything since. I recently received a friend request that reminded me of this story. This happened after I went to university, so I was about 18 years old at the time. I had made an effort to make friends after I moved onto campus, and ended up with a few groups to hang out with, including a new girlfriend and plenty of people from my classes that I liked well enough. There was one class before lunch where it was traditional for people to go to the cafeteria afterwards to eat in pairs or threes. I wasn't very discerning about who I'd go with, because I got along fine with most people from the class, and we were all sort of trying to make an effort to be social at that age. This meant that when one particular girl, Lily, asked if I wanted to go eat lunch together after that class, I didn't have any reason to refuse. We talked about school and mostly pretty casual stuff, nothing really noteworthy. She did ask me to get lunch with her again the next week though. Soon it became a pattern, and there wasn't exactly a way to start saying no suddenly. It was fine with me, but it did mean I lost the chance to eat lunch with anyone else on those days, which sort of hindered my social life a little. In hindsight, I suppose that was the point though. One day in class, I asked someone if I could add them on social media, and this just happened to occur in front of Lily. Immediately, I saw her face jerk towards me from a couple seats over. It was such a sharp reaction that it was hard to ignore. I still remember it even to this day. Needless to say, by the time I had gotten home later, Lily had already sent me a friend request. We had no friends in common either. I don't even know how she knew my last name. I was a bit surprised, but I guess maybe she dug through the university's social media pages and found me through there or something. I did get a bad feeling, but surely this was fine. She ended up messaging me quite a lot and commenting on anything I posted. I told myself she was just awkward. We became friends, if not close, and I'd known worse people. She still always got me to go eat lunch with her after our shared class. Other than that though, we very rarely had any time together in person. I would see her around sometimes, but I never went out of my way to hang out with her, you know. This meant it was mostly online messaging and seeing each other in group settings. Coincidentally, my girlfriend was also called Lily. This was something that clearly bothered the other Lily. She occasionally hinted that she wanted my girlfriend to pick a different name, or joked about it not suiting her. Clearly, she did not like my girlfriend at all, and I had an idea as to why. It was getting hard to ignore by this point. Lily was starting to unsubtly hint that she had a crush on me. I tried my best not to address it. I mean, what was I gonna say? I'd never known what to do when a friend tried to make a pass at me. I was also not interested in the very least. Even ignoring some of the weird stuff she did, Lily was just not my type. She tended to act and dress in a way somewhere between a 50s housewife and all those adults still obsessed with Disney princesses, if you can picture that combination. Things took an uncomfortable turn on the day of our last shared class of the year. Instead of asking me to lunch like she usually did, she asked if I'd go out for a walk with her. Again, I didn't know how to refuse, so I said a small one would be fine. Our campus was bordered by a large patch of woodland. Lily led me out into the woods, and the sounds of our fellow students slowly faded away. She sat down on a log and I joined her. She started talking about how much she was going to miss me over the summer. I tried placating her, but I really didn't want to be there, especially because she seemed to be on the verge of tears. I tried to make an excuse about having plans with my girlfriend, but before I could say anything, Lily chose to lean in and kiss me without warning. It was uncomfortable, to say the least. I got out of there and was happy to think I would not see her for a while. I came back to university after summer, moving into a house with my friends. Without going off topic, there were some serious issues in that group. Lots of petty arguing, and even worse, I broke up with my girlfriend around the start of that school year as well. Basically, the whole mess made me recontextualize things with Lily. It didn't seem quite so bad after all that drama. That said, I still didn't want to be alone with her. We mostly just talked online. She was still constantly messaging me every day after all. One upside of everything was that I started dating a boy. Lily was not pleased to hear that news. I think she hoped to kinda sneak in after I broke up with my girlfriend, but as I said before, that was never going to happen. This is where the story gets bad. At this time, I was fairly active on Tumblr. I occasionally talked about my life and mostly just reblogged photos and things I found interesting. I was on there one day when something odd happened. One of the blogs I followed had received an ask with some phrases I recognized. It took a second to register that it was taken from my About page. That made me freeze. I read the message properly. Someone was asking this completely random person to analyze a section of text from my page, asking for their opinion on the type of person who would write it. I cannot stress how messed up it was to see people talking about me like I was a character in a book or something. The important thing, though, was that the question had not been anonymous. It linked to someone's blog. Obviously, I wanted to know who had taken such a bizarre interest in me in particular. As far as I knew, not a single person in real life knew about my page. It's not like I shared it around or anything. No prizes for guessing who was behind it. What I found was disturbing. It was almost like a shrine. She was using a fake name, but I recognized Lily all over that thing. It was this cutesy pink and red page. There were a few posts about her interest, but most of the content was focused on her primary interest, me. Most of the posts were all about me. There were accounts of things I'd done recently, places I'd been, groups I participated in, going to the nightclub recently, as well as references to things as far back as I'd known her. It was clear she'd been keeping tabs on me, both online and offline, gathering every scrap of information she could about my life and hoarding it in this little collection. She talked about us eating lunch together, how special our dates had been to her, as if it was anything more than acquaintances just getting food after class. She even talked about the time she had forcibly kissed me in the woods. She quoted lyrics from all of my favorite songs, even though I'd never talked about them, and talked about how she'd always be there for me, no matter who else came into my life. Lots of references to loving me just the way he is as well, which answered another mystery about some anonymous love letters I'd been receiving earlier that year with the same wording. It got worse. There were a lot of posts about my boyfriend as well. Those were not so nice. It was angry and hateful. I didn't like to think of the sort of person who could write so obsessively being fixated on me. One thing that didn't make sense at first was that the blog had also made plenty of references to this best friend, Steven. She had never mentioned this person to me, and I'd never seen anyone else around her either. Her post talked a lot about Steven and how great a friend he was, how much fun they had together, how much he looked out for her. I was trying to work out whether this was an online friend or something, when one specific post made it all click. She had posted a photo and captioned it, "Steven sent this to me. He knew I would like it." The problem was, it was a photo taken straight from my page. I had not sent that to her. She took it from my page and then claimed I was her fictional best friend, because in her head she'd split me into two people, the two most important people in her life. In her messed up fantasies, I was both her perfect best friend and her soulmate who was going to end up with her. Who was she complaining to? Oh, she had an audience all right. People who took what she said at face value. I saw a bunch of random people agreeing with this stalker, things like my boyfriend didn't deserve me, we were bound to break up soon, I would be with Lily, the person I was clearly destined to be with. She had this fake fanfiction version of my life up for anyone to share their opinion on, and she made herself out to be the hero of it all, of course. I had only gone maybe a month back into this page's history, and I didn't look at everything that was there. It was too much, and I didn't want to see if there was anything from before I'd known her. Needless to say, I sent Lily a message confronting her about this blog. She said nothing. I can't stress how weird it was to have found pages and pages dedicated to me. Then she just acted like it never happened. She said nothing. Didn't even address it, just changed the subject like I'd never even said it, like she hadn't even registered that it existed. I've never seen deflection quite like it. Well, of course, afterward she deleted the page, or at least changed the name and hid it because I could never find it again. That was not the end though. I was not going to hang out with her anymore, but we were still shoved together in classes. She had started to actually scare me with what she might do next. I'm kind of a paranoid person already, so knowing someone was obsessively keeping track of me for who knows how long really scared me a lot. The next thing she pulled was trying to seduce my boyfriend. That was a useless attempt. What was her plan there? Did she hope to tell me he cheated and wait for me to break up with him or something? Why would I want her after that? When that didn't work, she tried to seduce all of my friends. None of them took the bait, thankfully. She ended up dating one of my former housemates for a while, but made sure to send me messages every day while they were together, letting me know she'd rather be with me instead. Lily made sure to stay in my life the entire time I was at university. There was a time when I tried to pull away from her, and she ended up starting these malicious rumors about me and damaging a career opportunity I'd put a lot of time into. I don't know all of what she did behind my back, but it made me realize it might be safer to just let her think she was a part of my life while ignoring her, rather than do something that would cause her to get angry. I knew at this point she really didn't have any reservations about hurting me to get what she wanted. After I graduated, Lily of course still wanted to hang around me, but now I didn't have that additional impetus of school keeping me there. I made excuses about work and barely talked to her after that point. I had entirely stopped posting on social media I knew she knew about. Of course, she would not give up that easily. Usually, I ignored all of her attempts though. I didn't think she was still tracking me online, but in hindsight, she probably was. I don't know how, but she'd referenced things I mentioned online somewhere else she couldn't have known about. The last time we had a conversation for real, she sent me a message out of nowhere. We hadn't spoken at all in months, and we hadn't talked about anything serious in much longer than that. Thinking about that conversation still makes my skin crawl. At first, she asked me some questions about how long I'd known I was queer. I told her some basic stuff, the kind of things I'd tell anyone who asked. Then she changed the subject. She started talking about how I would feel about her if she was a boy, about wanting to be a boy for me. The messages quickly became fetishistic. Again, we were not even friends at this point. We'd never been especially close, and we'd barely spoken for years. I can't imagine sending messages like that even to a close friend, let alone someone who barely knew you. I tried telling her not to pull this crap with me, and then she decided to change tactics. She started role-playing as me. The worst part is that she seemed to believe it was real, that those things had actually happened to her, even when she was quoting me word for word. Things I'd told her only hours before were now part of her life. It was like she was trying to absorb me or something, to take over my history, to make my life a part of her. Yeah, I really didn't want to talk to her again after that. I ignored future attempts she made and eventually silently deleted her from the inactive social media, which was her only real way of contacting me. I really thought she might finally move on. But then I started getting more friend requests on everywhere. They're still sitting there unanswered because I know if I delete them, she'll somehow find a way to seek me out elsewhere. Lily and I met nearly 12 years ago. This story is just the highlights, and even then, it's only the stuff I knew about for sure. A lot happened behind my back. I just know it did. The scariest thing that ever happened to me happened while I was at summer camp. I used to go there every summer. I'm a boy and I really enjoyed it. I looked forward to it as well, and when my parents dropped me off, I was so excited I barely even said goodbye to them. I ran off immediately to try and get myself involved in the various activities. When I was 15 years old, I even got the opportunity to be a counselor myself. It was great, actually. I had been going there yearly and knew the place inside and out. I was generally seen as pretty responsible. Being a counselor meant I was allowed to take out canoes whenever I wanted to. I especially loved canoeing, so this was a really big plus for me. Being a counselor, though, was much harder work than I'd initially thought it would be. A lot of the younger boys were brats, of course, and it was difficult trying to control so many kids at once. I had to break up several fights and make sure kids were going to bed when they were supposed to, and help care for them when they got hurt. I also had to make all their schedules as well. It was real tough work. I guess I never realized that I was just like them when I was their age. I finally got a break one day when I asked to be let off the nature hike roster. I had been working so hard that the supervisors decided I needed some rest. I decided I was going to spend the day doing the only thing I could do that would get me completely away from any kids. I decided to go out on the canoe. The camp that I worked in was by this nice, beautiful, long river. No sooner had I set out, making sure I was going the opposite way of the nature hikes, then I felt a supreme sense of relief. The trees were so beautiful on each side of the river, and I got such a good view of the many hills around the camp. The water was calm and still that day too, so it was a very easy-going experience. I was now alone in this empty area. It was pretty quiet for the most part, other than the frequent buzzing of what I assume were cicadas, or the occasional cry of a loon. Loon cries can be a bit unnerving if you've never heard one, but at least I could figure out what they were. With the echoing sound of the river valley, though, it made their cries seem so much more eerie. When I had been rowing for a long time, I began to hear a different noise. It sounded as if someone were possibly chopping a tree or something. I was surprised when I heard this, but I wasn't really worried. If I had accidentally wandered onto anyone's property, I would just explain myself and leave right away. My canoe began getting closer and closer to the noise as I kept on rowing. Eventually, I was able to hear the original sound. There was definitely someone chopping something. I became intrigued. Maybe someone was building something out here. It wasn't too long before I eventually was able to make out some movement up ahead of me. There was someone in the woods on the left side of the forest, but I couldn't quite tell what they were doing. At first, I tried to make it out by just squinting, but then I recalled that I'd brought some binoculars with me. I took them out. This was a bit of a pain. Obviously, it's difficult to look through a pair of binoculars while also trying to control a canoe. In fact, it gave me a bit of motion sickness. Eventually, though, I did get a view of the man who was up on the hill. He appeared to be chopping a log on the ground. I realized it was nothing too important, but figured the man probably owned the area and decided to go ahead and turn back around. However, just before I had decided to put my binoculars down, I saw him swing the axe into this log. Then he moved away. I had to do a double take to make sure I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. There was a man lying on the log, with the axe firmly embedded in his chest. I dropped the binoculars into the canoe, afraid for my own safety. The man was pretty far away, but if I could see him through the trees with my binoculars, it was possible he could see me way out in the open on the river. I was thankful the river was calm at least, as I frantically paddled my way back towards the camp. The return trip was a nightmare. The peaceful sounds I'd heard on my way down the river no longer seemed so peaceful. Every loon cry made my heart jump. Every sound of an animal moving through the trees made my heart race. I kept on thinking it could be that man, that he knew I'd seen what he was doing. If he was willing to do that to whoever that person was, what was he willing to do to me? It took me a few hours to get back. but boy was I so relieved when I did. I told my supervisors what I'd seen, but they immediately dismissed me. They told me I'd probably misconstrued what was going on. I was looking through binoculars on a canoe through trees, to be fair. Besides, it would be nearly impossible to find someone in those hills if something really had happened. A bit cavalier if you ask me, but I really had no choice but to accept what they told me. I did continue going back to summer camp until I went off to college, but I never again went off on my own for any reason. One of my favorite things to do was to go to my grandma's house in the fall of the year. This story takes place back in the 1980s or so, when I was around 13 years old. I lived in Virginia Beach, but my grandma at the time lived in rural Kentucky. So while I spent most of my time in the city, I enjoyed being out in the country whenever I could manage. I always had lots of fun climbing the hills and the trees that surrounded her house. We arrived late at night, so I couldn't go exploring for the first day that I was there. I was really eager to go out and do it the next day because of this. The adults always wanted us to be outside and away from them anyway. No one really cared that I and my cousin, who was also visiting, would go out and climb through the hills by ourselves. I had an uncle that was only a few years older than me. He used to try and scare us when we were younger and wanting to go exploring. He would tell us about all these vicious battles between American Indians and colonists in those hills. He made us believe that Indians were buried in shallow graves, and they would grab the feet of anyone who walked over their resting place and drag them to hell. That really terrified me when I was younger. The ground during this time was always covered in this huge blanket of leaves, so whenever we were out walking, I always half expected a hand to grab us from underneath. In fact, I even remember one time my brother, who was playing along with my uncle, once screamed that something had grabbed his foot and began screaming for help. While us younger kids had no interest in sticking around, we ran down the hill at the speed of light, screaming the entire way. The memories. Well, that was when I was a whole lot younger though. By the time this story happened, I didn't believe those sorts of things anymore. I had explored here, there, and everywhere on the hill since, and since nothing had happened to me, I knew it must just be a made-up story. My cousin Luke and I were the ones who went hill climbing on this day. We mostly had female cousins, and sometimes they would go climbing with us, but none of them wanted to come along this day. That was okay though. Luke and I didn't want to have to deal with watching the younger kids anyway. Plus, that meant we could explore deeper into the woods without them there. Soon we arrived to the top of the first hill, something we had done quite a lot. We climbed up a tree and looked around at the countryside. Most of the trees were without leaves at this time, so you could actually see pretty far out into the hills. Luke looked toward a certain direction and told me he thought we should go and see how far we could go that way. He felt like we would find something. It would surely lead us further into the hills than either of us had ever gone before. I agreed. We climbed down the tree and started down the hill. Once we got down, we immediately climbed over another hill. Halfway up, we decided to just walk along the side and see what we could find, as it was really tiring us out. I'm not sure how long we were out there. The woods could get really creepy in the fall. The sky was overcast that day, and the clouds were moving swiftly in the sky. Didn't seem to be much chance of rain, though. There was definitely a chill in the air, and it was enhanced every time the wind blew past. Eventually, we came upon a small creek. We decided to follow it, which is something we always did when we found a new water source. We likened it to a rainbow of exploration. If we followed the creek to its end, we would find a pot of gold, or at least something. Honestly, thinking back makes me feel pretty stupid, but hey, we were kids at the time. As we continued along, we saw a waterfall in the distance, so we decided to go check that out as well. As we got a bit closer though, we saw something extremely curious. There seemed to be a small, nondescript tent set up really close to the waterfall. Luke was really interested in this, and he wanted to go check it out. I told him I didn't think that was a good idea though. Someone was probably out camping, and they surely wouldn't like us disturbing them. He just couldn't be talked out of it though and began walking in the direction of that tent. I followed him along the way, nervous about this but not wanting to abandon him all to his lonesome. We arrived pretty close to the tent, but were still several meters away when the flap to the tent just shot open. A grisly, dirty man with a matted beard and matted hair emerged from the tent. In his right hand was a huge machete, and he didn't look very happy to see us there. Luke stopped in his tracks. He slipped on the leaves and landed on his butt because he stopped so suddenly. I was scared. I thought the man was just going to kill him. The man was yelling some kind of gibberish at the both of us. We couldn't understand a single word he was saying, but I didn't really care. I could tell he was not meaning to welcome us. I meant to run and grab Luke, but fortunately he was able to get up to his feet on his own before the guy could get any closer. He ran towards me and grabbed me to run my butt off. I didn't need much convincing. The man coming after us would have already been terrifying, but it was even more so now that he had that machete on him. I turned and ran as fast as I could. The first time I looked back to see if the man was still chasing us, I could see him full-on sprinting towards us. I think that gave me a burst of speed to try and get away from him. I just kept running as hard as I could, avoiding trees and bushes, and hoping I wouldn't fall. It was a very long time before either of us dared to look back again. When we did, there was no sign of the scary old man nor his machete, but that didn't make us feel any more safe in these woods. We kept running until we got back to the hill that was right by my grandma's house. We told everyone what happened, and no one seemed surprised. We were told there were many people who lived out in the hills like that, and they told us the best thing you could ever do was to just leave those people alone. I was a latchkey kid growing up. Also, I was an only child, and both of my parents worked. My mom would always be home when it was time for me to go to school, but my dad would have already left for work in the morning. By the time I got home, both of them would still be at work. I would go into the house, lock all the doors, and then do my best to pretend I was not at home. I lived within town, so I didn't ride the bus to school. It was a decent walk there and back. Actually, my school had more children that walked than took the buses anyway. Because of this, there was generally a pretty big crowd of kids that gradually got sparser the further you walked along. Normally, about halfway through my walk back, I would be walking all on my lonesome. On this day, I was a little bit worried. When I'd walked to school, it was bright and sunny outside. However, 2/3 into the day, it started getting really dark outside suddenly. The wind picked up and was blowing hard through the trees. The clouds were black and green and moving swiftly through the sky. It was obvious that a thunderstorm was on its way. Still, it didn't start raining while I was at school. There was the occasional thunder and lightning though. I was really hoping it would just continue like this because I hadn't brought an umbrella or a raincoat to school that day, and I really hated getting rained on. After school, I began my long walk home. The wind was quite fierce, but that didn't really bother me. I could handle the wind. I just wanted to keep myself from getting completely soaked. I tried walking faster than I normally would, trying to arrive home as quickly as possible. About halfway there though, this horrible siren began blaring in the air. I had heard this before, during tornado drills at school. We were taught that whenever you heard that siren, that meant a tornado was on its way. I was terrified. Getting wet was bad enough, but being caught out in the open in a tornado was even scarier. I was extremely frightened of tornadoes. I began running when I heard the siren. However, I was not in the best shape. I could only run so far before getting winded. Then I would try to run again after catching my breath. The siren began to blare through the whole town, and that was good enough motivation to keep going. I don't know what it was that caused me to turn my head in the moment, but at that exact moment I did, and as I did so, I saw the funnel touching down. I had never seen a real tornado in person before or since. If you haven't ever seen one, it fills you with a mix of awe and fear, and I felt both at the same time. The fear, though, was the biggest thing. I knew I had to get home right now. I tried my best to keep running. However, I kept looking to the side of me, fascinated by this tornado. As I ran, I kept wondering if it was moving toward me or not. I couldn't tell from the angle I was viewing it from. When I got home finally, I fumbled with my key to get the door open. Finally, I got it in and opened the door. Going in, I locked the door behind me. I knew I was supposed to head into the basement and do the duck and cover thing. That's what they taught us in the tornado drill back then, at least. I was only in the house for a few moments when I noticed something a different kind of scary altogether. The back sliding glass door had been shattered. Now, I know everyone tells you that you should open your windows during a tornado or the pressure will shatter them, but it didn't look like it was the tornado that had done it in. I mean, why would the one glass door be shattered and every single other piece of glass was fine? I walked into the house and over to the basement stairs, only to find the light in the basement was already on. I was sure my mom would have turned it off already. I was about halfway down the stairs and looking when I saw someone down there in our basement. Our basement was like our family room, with plenty of expensive entertainment equipment there. The man was obviously a burglar and was currently stealing from us. I didn't know what to do. I was stuck between this burglar and a tornado rapidly approaching. I mean, how could anyone have a worse day than that? I decided the burglar was not nearly as bad as the finger of God, though, and I ran down those stairs anyway. "Didn't you hear the tornado siren?" I yelled at the man. The burglar still hadn't noticed me, it seemed. He was shocked and moved toward me. "Take whatever you want," I told him. I ran to the corner and hid with my head beneath my hands. The burglar didn't get a chance to do much of anything, though. The tornado was close now, sounding like a freight train running through my house. And then I heard the sound of it eating my house, and that's a sound I cannot explain. You would have to actually be in this situation to ever understand what that means, and I truly hope that never happens to you. The things around me began crumbling apart and falling. I felt things smacking against me. The tornado ripped apart my house, tearing it into pieces. I half expected to get sucked up into it, but luckily I was not. It ripped apart my house above me and threw the rubble all around the neighborhood. Fortunately, I didn't get buried underneath anything. In fact, there didn't seem to be any major damage to the basement. Pieces of the ceiling fell in, but most of it didn't. As I looked around, though, that burglar was no longer anywhere to be seen. I had to wait in the basement for rescue workers to come get me out of there. The stairs led to nowhere. Interestingly enough, the burglar had run upstairs just before the tornado hit the house. He got buried underneath all the rubble and suffered some life-changing injuries. Luckily, he didn't die, though. He did go to jail when I explained to the firemen and police as to what happened. As for me, I had a laceration and a couple of bruises on my back from things hitting me. But otherwise, I was all right in the end. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in the comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.